Welcome to Unscripted.
I'm sorry.
Well, this is Giulianna's specialty, to laugh.
Oh, God.
We have today with us Giulianna, who, as you can tell, loves to laugh. Giulianna is currently the head of ventures for Draper Startup House Ventures, and she helps startups all around the world raise money through this online platform that we have, and she matches investors to companies looking for fundraising. So we'll talk a bit about that, Giulianna. But thanks for breaking the ice and laughing. Let's go way back and start from sort of where you were born and how did you end up here today.
Okay.
It's a long journey.
Light question.
Yeah.
Okay, so originally I was born in San Diego, California. And then how did I get here?
Yeah.
So I've been in Singapore for about 2.5 years now.
And apparently we met each other on a plane in Hong Kong.
Yes. So I
don't remember. Actually,
I know you don't remember, but I remember because it was more or less my first time in Asia, and we were in an airport, and there's this angry American guy yelling on the phone.
That was me?
That was you, because you had missed your previous flight, and then meanwhile we're like surrounded by mostly Chinese people.
Right.
And you were the only other American.
Oh,
yeah.
I'm usually not angry aloud.
No, that's the only time I've actually ever seen you angry, but you were yelling into the phone.
Sorry about that.
You were like,
Cathay
I need
Pacific.
a new flight.
Air Asia.
And then after I came to Singapore and I came to Tribe Theory, I walk in and we had like a networking thing outside and you were standing there. And I was like, I know you. But you didn't remember because,
right.
I mean, I wasn't loud. Only you were loud. So I've been in Singapore for 2.5 years. And I think I might like work my way back a little bit rather than going forward.
This is unscripted. So we just want to know about you. So however you want to tell the story.
Okay, so I came to Singapore 2.5 years ago. I originally meant to travel for 6 months. I was really burnt out. I was doing some stuff with startups, angel stuff, also finishing like a lot tied up. And I finished everything to take the 6-month break. And I had 13 countries planned. So Hong Kong was the first one where we met the first time.
So that was your first country in your list?
Yes, correct. Yes, so that was the first country. And then after that was supposed to be Singapore, Malaysia, work my way up Laos, Cambodia, all the way hop over to Taiwan, somehow get to the Philippines, then do the rest. Then stop over in Israel on my way back to California.
So you were really backpacking?
I was backpacking. And it was kind of like my first time like solo traveling. I dyed my hair brunette to fit in with the
You did?
I did, yes. So that was around that time. And so when I first got to Hong Kong, my first time in Asia, actually, and I feel like I traveled for about 11 days. And then I just kind of like, not saying I was bored, but I felt like there was more to do. I felt like I took my break.
But what were you doing in Hong Kong for 11 days?
I was supposed
all the tourist stuff?
I did I was like, I think I planned a little bit more time there than I probably should have. But at the same time, I was like, when I got there on day 3, I had my camera and I felt like I traveled. I was like, okay, and I was like really burnt out, workaholic type situation. So I wasn't like adapting to the travel well. So on day 3, I was like, okay, well, what else can I do? Because if I'm doing this for 6 months, I'm going to lose my mind.
But what were you burnt out from?
Working.
So before Hong Kong, before you started your backpacking trip, you were working with the Angel Syndicate.
I was working with the Angel Syndicate. I was working
in Colorado.
In Incline Village, Nevada.
Nevada, okay.
Yeah.
And Nevada had some sort of an angel network.
Yeah, they had an angel network. It was Sierra Angels, and I was also working as an analyst at a private equity firm, and I was also just working on like my own startup stuff and working to launch something there. So I was just really busy, and at the time when my team and I decided to not move forward with this startup that we were working on after we raised some capital. I was like, this is the perfect time for me to take a break, because if I don't take it now, I'm never going to take it.
Right. And what was the startup?
So the startup was called Limit, and it was, the idea of Limit was to get like young adolescents off of their technological devices.
Oh, so kind of like screen time management.
So funny enough, the moment screen time was announced from Apple was when we were like, we're not in the business of competing with Apple.
Yeah.
We're out.
Wow.
So that was
so
the
what?
moment.
This is what, 4 years ago? 5 years ago?
So it was about 4 years ago.
So before Apple announced,
I remember the day it was announced.
you guys were kind of ahead of your time in the sense you guys were working on a real problem.
Yeah, we had already raised some capital through like pitch competitions and some angel funding. So we had like 80 committed, and then we had 300 soft. So we raised money for this, and at the time, Limit was, I thought, like pretty cool.
That's a cool name.
I thought the entire concept was
Did you
like
come up with
pretty
that
cool.
name?
I did.
Because you're the branding person.
Well, I honestly, so I was really in love with the idea of Limit because, I mean, everyone was just always on their phones.
Right.
Anytime in a conversation, it's just always on a desk.
And you have younger siblings.
I have a younger brother.
So is that what inspired you to?
Exactly. So that's actually exactly what inspired me. And so the whole thing was, the concept was limiting technology through technology, which
Right.
is kind of a catch-22. But basically the idea was that you download the parent app and the child's app, and it's on both phones. And it doesn't, like all of the other existing things, you could monitor it. But we felt like the privacy of the child was super important, so that the parents couldn't see what the child was doing on their device.
And during that time, was there any other technology out there that was doing screen time limitations for kids?
So the only other like applications out there was mostly like the Norton, the big players that were monitoring and more or less sort of limiting like age, sort of like if you were watching or playing games on the computer, blocking websites.
But nothing really for the mobile.
No.
So that was a great idea.
So it was
at the right time.
It was.
It's just
and
maybe you were 1 year.
Well, looking back at the entire situation, because again, we weren't into the whole monitoring situation. Like for an example, the parents could also like set time limits, because it's like healthy 1 hour a day.
Right.
And so the child has like 1 hour throughout their day to time manage, and then all of a sudden just like their main apps would shut off, but they could always call their parents. They were always safe. So that was the whole, I think it was a very cool idea, and also the concept of the technology could limit when like young drivers, when they're in their cars, so they're not on their phones, without being like overbearing, and then still having the liberty. So at the time when screen time was announced, and I mean, to be honest, I think there was a lot of reliance on the individual like phone companies like Apple, Google, and that was another large battle. So when screen time was announced, we thought Apple was more or less taking care of the idea, and they didn't. They really didn't do a whole lot besides put on some like indicators of how much you're spending on your phone.
So you had this idea because you were inspired because your younger sibling was on the phone too much, and you said, "Hey, we have to do something about this."
Correct.
So you started Limit. During the same time, you were working at a PE company, and you were also doing the Sierra Angels syndication. So you were doing a lot.
Yeah, and at the time also I graduated uni early, but I was finishing school.
Right.
So I was done.
Oh, so you were still in university while you were doing this?
Quasi.
Towards the end.
Towards the end, yeah.
Wow. So yeah, you had a lot on your plate.
Yeah.
So. And what? So you were born in San Diego. And how did you end up in Nevada?
So I went there originally for school, for college.
University.
Yes.
You've been in Singapore long enough.
I know. I'm starting to like lose which word's which.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I went there at Sierra Nevada College. Now they rebranded to Sierra Nevada University.
That's a private school.
It's a very small private school.
And is it a girls' school or?
No. So it's a very small school. It has like about 1,000 undergrads.
That's very small.
Very small, but I wanted to ski. So that's sort of like what inspired that. And prior to that, I was in I guess what precedes that is high school. But before then, I was a fairly like big athlete. And
What sport?
tennis.
Oh, did you play in high school tennis for the school?
Yes.
Okay, so you must have been pretty good.
I was okay. I wasn't good enough to there was no future. So it was as much as everyone was like, oh, you should play.
So you weren't going to the Olympics playing tennis.
Correct. Right. I was literally, so that wasn't the future. So I was like, if that's not, I'm going to at least do something in college where I can at least do something for myself. Also the early mornings I didn't want to do. And if there was something more that I could do, I'd rather, work at a startup or start something or do something along those lines.
And did you go to high school in San Diego?
I did, yeah.
So you're born and raised in San Diego?
Yeah, I was born in, if you know the area, in Point Loma.
Yeah.
And then the latter part of my high school and middle school was in Poway, so a little bit north. Near the suburbs area, but then straight from there to Incline Village in Tahoe.
Yeah. So you went to Nevada because you wanted to go skiing?
Well, the lake was really beautiful. So it was just really pretty, and I just I walked up and I was like, yeah, this is a good place to spend a couple years.
Well, that must have been really nice going to college there.
Yeah, it was lovely. It was
Small
really great.
town.
Small town, and I think what I really liked about it, I think a lot of people might have struggled with there was it was very small. It was very mountain town. It was, we didn't have the sororities and the fraternities, but we had, sports teams, and we had mountain biking teams, and we had just getting outdoors and going skiing between classes.
So did you do sports in college for the school?
So I did. I actually recruited one of my friends, and I joined the cross country team. I thought I had 2 legs and anyone could do it. But that wasn't great because those were also 5 a.m. mornings.
Right.
And before and after class, before you start your day and after you end your day, you're just running. And I just wasn't my favorite. I
see a bit of a parallel. I see a bit of a trend of you not liking the mornings.
No, well, yes, but it was also one of those things where I think eventually I decided that I was, I wasn't the runner. I did a half marathon or whatever, and then I convinced the coach to just let me be captain and then run less. So I helped lead the team, but I was kind of on the sidelines after that.
But you were very athletic in university, and what inspired you to do a startup, do the angel stuff while you're in school? So originally,
what I was studying, I was a double major in economics and finance and economics and entrepreneurship. And the entrepreneurship side was always secondary to the finance and the economic side. But as I was, taking the course, so I come from a very entrepreneurial family as well.
Yeah, so let's hear about that. I actually don't know anything about your parents.
No, you don't.
Yeah.
So my dad is actually, he works in insurance. And my mom, as long as I've been born, I literally she hasn't worked. But always very, very entrepreneurial people, always coming up with ideas. And my great grandfather started a company, or not, my great grandfather was one of the 3 main investors in a company called WD-40.
The oil company for the
lubricant. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I love WD-40.
Yeah,
I used to have tons of those in the back of my car.
Yeah, so a little bit of a family company.
Ah, okay. So you come from the WD-40 family.
Correct. Yes.
Oh, that's a
it was cool.
brand.
No, yeah, it's pretty big. Grew up.
I miss WD-40.
Yeah. I have some.
Can you get them in Singapore?
Probably
not.
Yeah, you can. They're everywhere actually. And actually, when I was planning to travel Asia, that we have a plant in China, so I was gonna go check it out, just kind of see other things. That was cool.
And is your family still involved in that?
Yeah. Well, my papa, my grandfather, he stepped down from the board this last year.
So he started the company?
No. So my great grandfather was one of the 3 main investors.
Right.
So
your great grandfather.
Yeah.
Wow. That company's that old?
Yeah, but even then don't quote me on the year, but in hindsight, it hasn't been too long. Enough for me, who's just 2 steps below, to be singing Water Displacement on the 40th try.
Yeah.
Growing up.
Yeah. So your great grandfather invests in, I'm guessing, a new company probably the time was very technologically advanced.
Yeah, but also, I mean, like, the whole name of WD-40 is like the 40th try, right?
Right.
And so even then, I think it was, a pretty esoteric concept for something that, like, may or may not work that early on.
Right.
So, I mean, investing in a sizable amount of money in a company a long time ago was, pretty unheard of.
Right. And are both of your parents from both of your side, are they both Italian or?
So no, my father is Italian, and my mother is Spanish and Irish. But I mean, for the most part, both influences. But yeah.
Right. So your great grandfather invested in this WD-40, which did really, really well. And then did your grandfather continue on that sort of legacy, or?
Yeah, I mean, my papa was on the board for many years. Until he just stepped down. And I mean, for the most part, there's always been like familial involvement, but not only from my grandfather, but like from a good part of my father's side of the family.
So you actually come from an investor's DNA.
Yeah, so it was in the blood, and it's not something I talk about a lot either.
Right.
Actually, like fairly ever.
I would have never associated WD-40
to
Giulianna.
Yeah, no, and it's not something that like. I mean, how long have I known you and you've never heard of this? So
yeah, well, we've never really spoken about your family.
Yeah, I guess not.
Okay, so that's great. So then, I'm guessing then your parents were also maybe involved in some way,
my
or
dad
they did
was
their own
for a
thing.
bit, yeah, but then did his own thing, and then my mom, obviously that wasn't her side of the family, so. My mom did other things prior. She worked in like large sports events with film, and stuff. So different background there. But yeah, no, they were always very encouraging and very much inspirational to starting my own thing. Like do what you're gonna do. And yeah, so that's sort of that background.
So when you were in Sierra Nevada College, or now Sierra Nevada University, that must have been a lot of fun.
It was great.
Right? They're very community oriented, lots of outdoor sports, beautiful place.
Beautiful place, and the also thing that I really loved about Incline specifically was, we weren't allowed chains like restaurants, so there's no like Target, there's no Walmart.
Right.
You have to go to Reno or you have to go to Carson. And it's just very small town, everyone. You walk into a coffee shop, and it's just, and I think that's actually what I liked about Singapore too, is that how small it is, and how community oriented also.
Right. So then when you graduated college, you had some work experience. What did you end up doing after that?
Yeah, so I actually had like a good amount of work experience because at the time I, again, sort of, the class schedule, I made it so I started working in the angel stuff in the private equity scene when I was fairly young, like a freshman, sophomore. I actually remember emailing my boss at the time, and he was like, "Oh, let's all go out for drinks and celebrate. You're coming to the firm." And the most embarrassing thing was I had to email him and be like, "Actually, like, I'm not old enough to drink." So I was like, "Have a great time, like like the celebration, but like I can't be there. I won't be let in." But no one knew that at the time. So.
And so the PE stuff you did while you were in college, any interesting deals you worked on? Was there any specific focus?
Yeah, so we were like buy-side M&A, and there's a lot of interesting projects. I felt there are a lot of uninteresting projects. I feel like it wasn't for me because everything was just later stage, and at that point the companies are established, and the sectors we were dealing with, like for an example, like the ag sector, it's great, it's not for me. So like projects for like 3 to 6 months at a time of just sourcing and working with the investors and trying to find matches for them. Actually, it's not that much different than what we're doing now.
But it's interesting that you were doing angel investing stuff as well as private equity, because it can't be any different, right? It's like polar extremes of the investment cycle.
Well, what's interesting is like on a spectrum, on like a continuation spectrum, like it's just earlier, right?
I mean, way earlier.
But I mean, for the most part, it is just a life cycle of like a circle. So same but different.
Right. So yeah, you picked up
I'm
a few.
Singaporean now.
Same but different. Okay, so yeah, so you're right. Like angel investing is very much emotional based. It's very like you take a bet on
the founder, really.
The founder or a family member or maybe just an idea.
Right.
Whereas private equity is much more mature, cash flows, right?
Correct.
So it's maybe
EBITDA.
right, EBITDA.
Yes.
But you're right. Like that's a good way of looking at it. Is infused. The mental framework is it's just a life cycle, and this is the earlier part of the life cycle. So was that what like doing those two different models? Was it fun or was it?
I mean, I thought everything at that time was fascinating and interesting and fun. The PE side of things was much less interesting to me than the angel side of things.
Right.
And to me, it was more along the lines of just potential, with startups and what you could do and where they go and how they pivot. To me, it was critical thinking and problem solving. Yeah. Whereas way down the road, they've problem solved. Yeah. And that's probably why, we're in that discussion's happening. Yeah. So I mean, all of it was interesting, but I definitely had a preference towards one.
Yeah. So Sierra Angels, is that? Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah.
Because it seems it's something that I had never heard of before.
Yeah.
But clearly, there's people who invest, so
Yeah.
I'm sure they create an angel syndicate. Was it a pretty big community or lots of deals? And what kind of companies are in the Nevadas?
Yeah, so I think for the most part, the truth of sort of angel syndication is that the companies that are in Nevada are also all on the West Coast because they all rely on each other to fill the rounds.
Yeah.
So I mean, at the time, so Sierra Angels is about it's a member organization of individual angels where they more or less have two companies come present every 6 weeks. So it's very cyclical. And then the companies that present, they don't go in as a fund. They go in as individual angels. So if half the angels are not interested, and then the other half are more or less they can still invest. There's no it's basically sitting around a table and being I liked him, like the founder. Yeah. I'm going to put in X amount of money. Yeah. And the angel, I learned a lot there because. Sitting around the table of them discussing these ideas of why or why not, but it's also one of those things where they're all at a table and they're all there for a reason. Sierra Angels, as most organizations, are very competitive to be in, to be a part of, and every single one of them is a master or a genius, an expert at one area of life. Right. So one of them is in biotech, one of them is a doctor, one of them is, had that B2B SaaS company, and every single one of them likely has had an exit, and they're all very knowledgeable people, discussing, and a lot of times they disagreed with one another, and that was cool. Yeah. That was cool to see, the rapport.
The points of view.
Exactly. Right. Of two very knowledgeable people. One thinks it's the best idea in the world. The other one's this is going nowhere in 2 months. And to see that interaction. Yeah.
Which is usually the case in the angel stage, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's so much emotionally driven. No one knows.
No one knows, yeah.
So you base your opinions based on sort of just your personal,
exactly.
I guess, reference points.
Yeah, and at that point, these companies have been around, anywhere from 3 months to maybe a year. Yeah. Who knows? Right.
Has the Sierra Angels, have they had any success stories?
Yeah, they have. Quite recent. What's interesting about angels though is that especially around this time, it takes 8 to 10 years to see whether a company survives or does really well or exits.
8 to 10 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a long cycle.
It's a long cycle. So when you were investing in that company, you're committing that money for that amount of time.
Right.
Whereas private equity, it's
well, yeah, I mean, it's mature companies.
Exactly.
You're buying mature companies and you're reselling them. So you enjoyed the angel.
Yeah, I just loved the startup world.
Right. Variety of ideas, variety of people.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so it seems like you had a very idyllic college experience. Small town.
So. Yeah.
Great university. Private school. you're doing PE stuff, you're doing sports, you're doing angel stuff, you're launching your own startup. I mean, it seems like the dream college life, right?
It was really great. I think my one regret about college in the first place is that I graduated early. So that was about a year.
So you were like 21 when you graduated, or 20 when you graduated?
Yeah, around there. So graduated a little early, but I mean, I think I got the most out of all of it. Even had a chance to study abroad in the summer, so I think all of that was just, I maximized my time, I'd say.
Right. But then you got burnt out.
But yeah, but then because of all of those things, I was done.
So you started traveling right after college?
Well, no, since I graduated early. So I had about like a year before I traveled and worked for another year.
And what did you then, like during that
same stuff. So
private equity stuff, angel stuff.
Yep, correct, yeah.
So you must have built some really good relationships around that
I built
region.
a lot of excellent relationships, and at the time, Sierra Angels was launching Sierra Innovations, which was, more or less an incubator. So I got to work a lot on that and helped put that together, and got to know a lot of the members really well. And again, the community is super small, and it's reliant a lot on the Reno ecosystem also. But also is super close to the Bay Area.
Right. Do you still stay in touch with them?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, no.
Are they on our platform?
No, because we have our American team.
Yeah, that's right. No, but it's really cool to see that these ecosystems that are not very well known are still doing awesome stuff.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I'm guessing every region of the U.S. probably has some sort of an angel network.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
And the East Coast, and they all kind of specialize in different things. The East Coast, Boston specifically, a lot of robotics, a lot of the sciences, and sort of all of the regions kind of specialize in different things, but all of them have their own angel groups. But that's the thing about the angel syndications, is that all of them are just so tight with one another.
Yeah.
So the
Sierra Angels would be working with other
the Bay
Angels
and the Sandhill and all of them.
Yeah. Yeah. So then you graduate a year early. You go work full time in investments.
Yeah.
And then you get burnt out.
Yeah.
And you're like, hey, I want to go travel.
Yes.
Why did you pick Asia?
So I picked Asia because I felt like when I studied abroad, I studied abroad in Ireland, and when I was there, I felt like I saw a good amount of Northern Europe, and then prior to that, I had traveled most of the rest of Europe, and South America to me was really large. But
you look it on the map.
Yeah, it's 6 months, I was just a little overwhelmed. But then I looked at Asia, and I know that the ecosystem was quite cool, and so I just kind of wanted to compare, because at the end of me leaving the States and beginning to travel, the Bay Area specifically had a lot of innovation. It's known for that. That's why it is what it is. But I felt like if I saw one more SaaS company, so at a certain point, I felt like they weren't doing a lot of just differences of the same. And so I just kind of wanted to come to Asia, where the Indonesian market was vastly growing, and it was somewhere I'd never been, and it was something that I just wanted to experience and kind of get to know, and just to understand the difference of idea of entrepreneurship, where I come from a very Americanized perspective of it.
I find your story super interesting, because I'm sure we'll get to it, but you graduate college early, so you're super young when you sort of say, hey, I'm burnt out, I'm gonna go travel, I'm gonna go to Asia, and you had a plan of 6 months of backpacking, but it's been 2.5, 3 years later, and you're super well embedded in the startup community in Singapore and in Asia, and you're doing something completely different from what the plan was, right? When you left, but when you started traveling alone, backpacking in Asia, how did your parents? Were they worried at all?
Well, for sure. When I originally was hey, Mom and Dad, I'm going to Asia, their response was more or less like, do you want the tracking chip in your wrist or your ankle? So that was like legit, like the first thing that was said to me. And then my mom, was very much along the lines of, okay, go dye your hair. Just,
so that was your mom's idea.
It was my mom's idea.
Hey, it's a smart idea.
I mean, it wasn't a bad idea, but I'm also still like a foot taller than most people in the region. So I mean, flaws.
Right.
But regardless, I think they were okay. I think I also didn't, because I didn't travel for as long as I thought I would, and then I didn't really tell them I moved here. I was just kind of working here. I was still gone a lot on the weekends as I started working in Singapore, so everyone just kind of thought I was still traveling.
Yeah.
And then when I was home for Christmas, I was like, yeah, I kind of live there.
Right. That's right. Okay, so you're like, hey, mom and dad, I'm solo backpacking in Asia. They were worried. Dyed your hair.
Yeah.
But you started your trip in Hong Kong, which is modern city.
Yeah.
Maybe their worries were not as bad because Hong Kong is a very safe place. And then you ended up in Singapore and you sort of stayed and started working.
Yeah.
So they probably were like, okay, thank God she's not, taking the jeepney in across Philippines or going to one of the islands or.
I mean, again, like I didn't really communicate to them right away that I was working in Singapore. They still thought that the plan was the same, and I was kind of alluding to the fact of, I like kind of, have a project here. But before that, when I was in Hong Kong, I started working anyway. So because I had that period of time when I felt I had traveled, when I was like, again, I didn't adjust super well to like being a workaholic to not. And then that was when I started making my documentary. And so they thought it was like a documentary project.
Yeah, where is that? I keep hearing about this documentary that you started 3 years ago. Where is this documentary?
Okay, so it's not done, but I fully intend to finish it.
Did you even start it?
I started it.
And you started in Hong Kong?
I started in Hong Kong because after like the 11 days, I was like, I need to do something more.
Yeah.
So I started going to co-working spaces. And I went to co-working spaces just to like get involved in like the startup communities. And what I found is that what everyone was working on was really cool. And again, so it was just like comparing my Americanized notions of entrepreneurship. So I started making the documentary to compare the difference of the westernized notions of entrepreneurship versus the Eastern.
Right.
And so that's when I started my documentary. I got about 4 or 5 testimonials. And then I accidentally wiped my drive. So I lost those.
Oh, and I hated when that happened.
Well, that was really tragic. But then how I found Tribe Theory was I was looking up like where to find entrepreneurs in Southeast Asia and Singapore. So that was like literally, I think I Googled like entrepreneurship, like hotel, like Singapore, and like Tribe Theory came up.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So that was originally.
That's how you found.
That's why I came to stay here,
right.
So I could get access to entrepreneurs and get access to their stories.
Right. I love that story.
Yeah.
Because it means what we're trying to do in some way is working.
Oh, absolutely. And when I came here, again, I remember getting dropped off on like Taylor Iyer Street, and I literally walked down the street and I was like, I could live here. That was like the first thought I had. I was like, I could live here. This is pretty cool.
Well, that's a nice walk from
Taylor Iyer
to here, right? It's like one of the better parts of town.
Absolutely.
Thriving, full of life, big buildings, shop houses, food courts.
Absolutely. And what I was looking at is like the people was just like how diverse it was.
Yeah.
And I was like, I think this is somewhere that's super comfortable. Yeah. And then I came here and shot. I remember actually my first person in Singapore that I shot was Esther. And her mural.
Oh, yeah.
And so after, listening to her story after she backpacked the world and just like funded it by painting murals. Yeah. And I'm like, that's entrepreneurship to me. Like that is 100% what I came here to film and to grab. And there were so many people working in this space that were working on such awesome concepts and ideas that, I started filming. And again, after that short sit, then I got a job, so then that kind of like halted for a little bit. But I very intend to finish it.
Right. So you land in Singapore, you fall in love with Singapore right away. Yeah. Right. You get dropped off on Taylor Iyer, you come to Tribe Theory, you attended an event, and you're like, this is really cool, right? So instant love with the city. Then how did you end up staying and getting a job? Because your plan was to keep traveling, right?
I think, yeah, so for sure my plan was to keep traveling, but at the same time, before I left like the United States, and I sort of had an ulterior motive to stay abroad. And I didn't necessarily know where that was going to be along my journey, and I didn't expect it to be so soon, but I also didn't expect Singapore to be so lovely. So after that, I came to Singapore, and one of my old one of the angels who worked at Sierra Angels, or was a part of the syndicate more or less, I reached out to her because she was Singaporean, and I was like, hey, I'm filming a documentary. Do you know of any entrepreneurs?
Right. So you had this connection.
I had this connection,
here
and
from the angel
exactly.
network.
And so she was also an entrepreneurial, very entrepreneurial.
Yeah.
Started her company in the States. And a very cool company, very, very awesome person. And she was like, yeah, like I have a good friend who's a founder. She works in fintech, at a large robo-advisory firm. And I was like, okay, great. She put me in touch with her, and I went to go interview her. And by the way, if you're ever looking for a job, I think that's probably the best way to get one.
That's true,
I didn't ever expect it, but it was always you just learn about what people are doing and what they're working on. And so
you show interest.
Oh yeah.
So
but I had no intention of getting a job.
That's a really good point.
Yeah. No, it was quite unique, and I recommend that to anybody looking for a job. But at the time, I didn't intend to like work. I was traveling, and so I went to go interview her. And after learning about what she was trying to do, and what she was trying to do was financial literacy, and very much at the time merging with a different company that was sort of wealth management on the tech side also, and then we were the financial literacy side, again a fintech. Had big banks as clients, went to go teach workshops, and sort of like the whole thing in itself, and then was at the time also being acquired by this large robo-advisor out of Hong Kong. So it was just like a very active time with this company. And so, she was like, why don't you come and stay and work here for 3 months? And I was like, okay. Well, at the point I was like, okay, maybe. But then I was like, also, yes. There's no way.
What a great opportunity.
Exactly.
And it's someone you know.
Exactly. Quasi knew.
Right.
Yeah. But I mean, the connection was there. And at that time, since we had to rebrand the subsidiaries, that was a really awesome experience. And then the acquisition, and then working in Hong Kong and through Singapore,
right.
And that's kind of when I lost the documentary side, and then so that was how I got to stay here.
So you got offered a job because you went to go interview this person. She's like, hey, we could really use the help. Can you help us for a little bit? And which you did, which probably dragged on for a bit. And you were working, if I remember correctly, you were doing their rebranding, right? And did you have experience with branding, rebranding stuff, marketing stuff? Because you're really good at it. Because you did our rebrand, right? You did that project management for the rebrand. Was that something you had experience with, or was it something that sort of naturally came to you?
Well, prior I did have a little bit of marketing experience. I think I've always just like joined projects and things, and at the time also when I first came to Hong Kong, I picked up a few startup clients just going through the co-working spaces also, of like helping them with their marketing and their branding. But to me, it's not like marketing and branding. To me, it's just like very simple storytelling and communication to like have people understand your concept.
Right.
When I helped, Wealth in Asia and Hive Up to Wealthup, that was more or less like the first, because when I started there originally, it was, let me just tag along. I started very informally, like let me get involved, and then we'll see if like I can fit somewhere here. And then that opportunity came along, and I more or less, it was just kind of an obvious thing for me to like start doing as I was like, working newsletters and like doing all the stuff.
Were you doing newsletters in college?
Well, actually, the first job I really ever had was Director of Public Relations for our Student Government Association.
Right.
So that was more or less like the introduction to like the PR.
So PR, communications, writing, storytelling. Yeah. That was something. So you did have experience in college, just doing that for your student body group.
Correct. Yeah.
Right, but you're good at it. I mean, you have a natural. You write well. I think your copy, your storytelling is very good. So is this company still Is it Wealthup?
Yeah.
Are they still? They're still called Wealthup.
Still called Wealthup.
So it was Wealthup. What was the story there? What was the merger? Or
so the story there was Wealth. So Wealth in Asia again was the wealth management tech side, and then the Hive upside was the everyday financial literacy.
Right.
And so it made a lot of sense for us to just combine the tech and the brand to sort of more or less serve wealthier clients, but also be able to like communicate financial literacy to the masses more or less, as we partnered with the DBS and like a lot of these banks to help communicate. And I think the branding, for me at least, came somewhat naturally, because I think a lot of times people forget how to communicate concepts when they've been working on them for so long, and I think it's very easy to take a step back and sort of review who would understand this.
Right.
And so Privé acquired Wealthup after more or less was merging on the premise of.
And Privé's a company from Hong Kong.
They're Hong Kong robo-advisory. So they more or less do robo-advisory and sell to big banks also. So the thought there more or less was content. So Wealthup was producing a lot of financial literacy content, and it was more or less the content arm for this robo-advisory, which works like the attrition, it works out pretty well, because for Privé to thrive and succeed and provide these products to banks, people need to know what they're using.
Right.
So it all sort of like linked up very well.
And was that a good experience doing that whole?
Yeah, I think there was. Again, it was my first time working in Singapore and Asia, and I think I had some cultural differences.
Sure.
Where very, very, quite a lot. I'm pretty loud, and I'm pretty opinionated, which and so I think, for the most part, there were some cultural clashes, but I think just, it was also a high growth startup, Privé, for sure, and for the most part.
Sounds like a club, Privé.
Well, it's the restaurant here also.
That's right. Okay.
Unrelated, but we had some outings at the restaurant because the name worked out.
Right.
But yeah, so I think it was all a great experience. At the time, again, like I said, I had some cultural differences, but I wouldn't have traded it for anything.
Yeah. So it was like a very crash course into Asia work culture.
Well, absolutely. And I think what was great about this particularly was, it made me focus when I was doing newsletters on markets and stuff, and creating like digestible pieces of content for people who barely know what an investment is. It made me really, really into the scene.
Right.
The research of all of the financial markets and understanding, which beforehand you barely ever need to read about it. Back in the
it was a
States.
full on. I remember speaking to you while you were doing that, and you would be swamped all the time.
Absolutely. Those were 18, 20-hour days sometimes.
And so you did that for 6 months?
No, so I actually, by the time I started there, well, in the beginning I was still kind of traveling, working 3-4 days a week, gone on weekends, but back. So I ended up doing that for about a year. And then after that, I sort of more or less transitioned back into, sort of a growth role for the workshops and more of a marketing role. But again, I don't think I'm necessarily the person to do marketing after an initial setup launch phase.
That's interesting, because I think for someone to be able to succeed as someone doing marketing or branding or communications for a fintech company or any financial services company, you kind of have to know the language, right? You have to know the investments language, you have to know the financial services. You can't fake it, right? And so with your background in financial services, it seemed like it was well suited, because you kind of knew both things, right?
And at a certain point, I just it was a very, I feel like almost my job was easy in the sense of I had a very nice transition,
right?
From finance, and I had the startups, to fintech, which is just kind of the combination of what I was doing, dabbling with both beforehand. So yeah, I mean, it was, but I think that the piece to that, which was new, which was why it was quite challenging, was, you know, the lack of Asia exposure, primarily to only having to care about Asia.
Yeah, yeah. So I bet your parents were relieved that you're not island hopping, but you're in Singapore, one of the safest countries in the world, and you're working and doing something very exciting.
Yeah.
Right? So were they happy, or?
So I think they were happy, but I think my parents have a very, very strong bias about that they just wanting me to be stateside. So I think as much as they were thrilled about it, and actually I was home quite a bit because, well, one, the world was open, so you could do that. But also, because I didn't fully mean to move here after the 6 months, I intended to go back and, you know, start working again and start doing other stuff. So I had like a lot of commitments of like weddings and like, you know, a lot of things where I couldn't rationalize not being there. No one had really, like, nobody knew that I moved. No one knew what I was doing. Everyone thought I was just like traveling. And so it was all like very under the radar, where like pretty much only my parents and like best friends knew.
Right. So then you finish your stint at Privé or Wealthup, and then what happens?
So I had to be back in the States for about like 2 or 3 months. And then I actually fully intended to finish my travels at that point. And actually it was around the time of, I think, March or something is when we came back in contact with one another. And so it was more or less along the lines, we got in contact with one another, and that's when we started the tribe theory experiments.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right. Okay.
Yeah.
So then
So then after I, you know, intended to transition, I wanted to be in the States for a while just to, again, take another break, because I'm kind of intense with the whole, you know, like really intense days and burnt out again. So I wanted to go back to the States, and then I was going to come back, finish traveling, but then Draper happened. So that's when I came back to stay again, because of the deal. And then rebranded, and then here we are.
Yeah, and we said, hey, we want to launch this investments platform to help companies raise money. Do you want to take that on? And you said yes. But then before that, you helped us with the branding and the marketing, the rebrand and the marketing, which you did a great job of.
Well, thank you.
And then you jumped into the investment side, and here we are today. A year later, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And during this 1 year of you sort of getting exposed to a lot of companies around the world, a lot of investors from around the world, as you build Draper Startup House Ventures, what have been some interesting observations or insights that you've had that may be unique to you because of your, you know, various different experiences in Sierra Angels, being an athlete, traveling? Any interesting insights?
I think.
And if you don't, it's okay.
No, you just like have a lot of loaded questions.
Open-ended questions.
Okay, fair. I think obviously the insights are like substantial. I think there could be a book about insights, and I think primarily for a few reasons. One, because the whole idea of like a global syndicate and like democratizing venture capital, and, you know, allowing a founder in Manila who's never done this before be funded by, you know, global investors. I think a few takeaways are, you know, I think, you know, education is obviously the one thing that's just a barrier for everybody. You know,
on both sides
of everything, right? And I think another large takeaway is that I originally came here to see the difference of like, you know, the U.S. versus Asia. And now it's very clear to me that I think actually everywhere it kind of operates very similarly. I think it's just different growth stages. And I think, you know, maybe the States is, you know, where Indonesia is like up and fast growing and up and coming, and there's, I mean, but for the most part, VC like investments, it all operates like a club. You know, it's still a referral game. It's always going to be a referral game.
You can't really automate it. People have tried really automating it, but it somehow we're not there yet.
And I think the same thing with HR, right? I think the parallels are quite obvious, because at the end of the day, you can have like a job listing on LinkedIn and have 5,000 people apply, but it's still the person who's still referred by, the COO's sister or whatever is going to get the job 10 out of 10 times.
Yeah.
And the same thing with startup being funded, right? You can like apply to all these things and cold call, and it works. I mean, if you're really diligent about it, but the job's a lot easier if you have somebody who knows you and can like just introduce you to a firm, which makes your job substantially easier.
Right. That's a good analogy of human resources.
I just thought about that.
That's actually a very good analogy, because you're right. There are a lot of tech platforms that sort of automate
that try
a lot
to
of
fix it and try to level the playing field.
But ultimately, there has to be some manual human, conversations.
Right. Yeah.
A couple of years ago, I was very interested in this automation that Social Capital was doing. So I don't know if you know Social Capital.
Yeah, familiar.
It's now I think it's a hedge fund, but at the time I think it was purely a venture fund. They had launched something called Capital as a Service, CAS. and the idea behind it was, hey, how do you automate the investments process where there's no human interaction? That way you fund companies purely based on their merits.
Right.
And so they created this complete model that you have to input all the data, like revenues, costs, just like lots of lines of information. And the idea was that then the computer would say whether you get funded or not.
Yeah,
based on all the factors, factors, right? So I did apply, and I actually ended up talking to someone. Someone called me and said, "Hey," and I had this conversation. Ultimately, we didn't get funded by them, but I thought that was an interesting approach. But it's no longer in operation, so like that model is no longer there. But I thought that was the closest to something I've seen where, you try to get an algorithm to really make the decision and remove the human factor.
The human aspect,
but you're saying that human factor is so critical that you can't remove it.
In this industry for certain, like I can't really speak for HR, but this analogy, now that I'm thinking about it, can go like tenfold, right? Like even dating, right? You can have like the Bumbles and the Tinders, but like even the referral of like, you're like, hey, this person, like more than the cold aspect of, not knowing a person from like a startup as a founder, as an employee. At the end of the day, you still need to like character check and see, who they worked with, and like work ethic. I think is always going to have to be a factor.
Yeah. You seem to be someone that has a lot of capabilities, right? So from like marketing, branding, communication, private equity, venture investments, angel investments. So you're a very capable person, and I think you doing Draper Startup House Venture sort of was it wasn't planned. It was like almost a fluke.
An experiment.
It was an experiment.
Yeah.
And what are your thoughts on like your future in terms of the things that you want to do? Because from what I remember, like doing investments may not be the thing you want to do. You have some ideas of building your own like you have ideas that you want to build. What's in the future cards for Giulianna, or you're just going to take it day by day and see what happens?
I think if I've learned anything, it's that I'm not a great planner. So I've kind of like retired the idea.
Yeah, your meetings are generally not very planned.
Hey, we have fun.
That we do, yeah.
Okay, but I mean more than anything, like I think it's good to like have objectives and goals, but I've kind of retired like any one plan for myself. I think the space that I really do enjoy, because my attention span is kind of very very small. It's just sort of like the venture creation aspect of getting to dabble in a lot of different industries and like check out a lot of different things. I love the space of fintech first and foremost. I can definitely see myself, doing a startup in similar spaces. I have some ideas, but I think just always I love the launch phase. I love like the ideation to launch to growth.
Right.
So that I think is definitely like my favorite area, because there's just so much like strategy and so much. I love to problem solve.
Yeah.
It's just like a math problem, right? Like,
Yeah.
so I think that's all I know. That's all I got.
Also, you have some sort of lingering ideas of things that you are interested in and want to dabble in. But for now, doing this ventures platform is interesting enough because you're getting, you're getting to see and dabble with so many different things, which has always been my favorite part of venture capital. Has been you get exposed to so many interesting people
and startups too. I mean,
lots of ideas.
It's a very constant pool of inspiration.
Right.
Also,
lots of business models.
A lot of really interesting things that you would have never thought twice about.
Yeah.
And you're all of a sudden looking at a deck and you're like, oh, that's quite cool.
Do you have any aspirations to take on your current experience and I don't know if evolve is the right word, but push it up and go work for a big corporate, doing interesting things. Let's say a big VC fund, doing what you're doing, but
corporate
in a much larger.
Yeah,
because I think one of the conversations we had before was you were thinking about business school, and maybe is that in the cards or?
Not anytime soon. I think I'm too busy doing productive things.
Why do you need business school?
I didn't almost want to say that, but I mean, it's always going to be there.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of other opportunity won't. Just in terms of timing and whatnot. I think in terms of large corporates, I think not that I'm incredibly disorganized, but I think my thoughts, the way that I think, and I'm not necessarily a creative person, but I think the detachment, I don't know, I don't know if I'm necessarily disciplined enough to be in a corporate right now. The bureaucracy.
Yeah.
I think
planning part.
No, but I mean, quite honestly, right? I think it's really hard to go from a startup and freedom and working for yourself to having to follow direction.
Right.
Not to say that I couldn't, but it's just been a while, and I don't know that if I want to. But maybe not yet. Maybe eventually. Maybe in 2 years I'm burnt out so badly that let's do something easy and go to business school.
Yeah, maybe. But kidding. Who knows? I mean, who knows? But I think I'm very curious to see how your career progression happens, because what I like about your story is I can relate to it, because the way you ended up in Singapore, the way a lot of these things happened was you sort of just throwing yourself at the unknown and not really having a plan. But really amazing things happened because A, you're capable, and B, you can create value. But also I think you were just ready for you were ready to embrace adventure.
And I think it's not only that, but it's just being open to opportunity.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people who want to leave jobs or whatever, they're there's a lot of steps preventing them to working for themselves or having to. I don't know. I just personally never wanted to rely on any other entity.
Yeah.
I personally always felt that whatever I was going to do, and I had to make it happen.
Right.
And again, if it wouldn't have been Singapore, I know for a fact it would have been somewhere.
Yeah.
And mostly because I don't really ask for things. I just kind of start being involved.
Yeah. I absolutely love these types of stories because it's rare. You're from the U.S. You lived an idyllic childhood, right? Went to a good school, and for you to sort of just say, "Hey, I'm going to go backpacking, go to Asia." Embrace the future, embrace adventure, be open to opportunities, and then sort of just roll with it is not something that happens with a lot of people.
No.
Right?
And I think my one goal actually after sort of finishing college was, I had a few interviews and jobs lined up, but I don't know, the idea of doing them made me sick almost. The one goal I had for myself is, the Bay Area is going to be there for a very long time.
Right.
I just didn't want to be somewhere where I felt there was not a lot of diversity of thought at the time. Where it's if you have a different opinion, you're oftentimes just ousted or categorized. And I felt there was something, more that I could maybe leverage at a different time. But
yeah. All right, we've got 30 seconds.
Okay.
We're trying to keep this under 1 hour.
Okay.
If you had to go back to your 17-year-old self, what advice would you give her?
Christ.
Quick one.
I don't know. Just stay open to opportunity, and don't let anyone tell you no. Just start offering help. Just like start doing things, even if they're like no, like no, just give it to them.
Yeah.
Like they'll bring you in eventually.
Yeah. Awesome. All right.